Richard Dyke, billionaire CEO of Dyke Holdings, wasn't meant to be in Nigeria that night. His calendar was filled with meetings in Dubai, contracts in London, and dinners with investors in Paris. But something gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't shake. So without telling his wife, without telling his staff, without telling anyone, he boarded his jet and flew home. When the wheels touched down in Lagos, his driver blinked in surprise. "Sir, we weren't expecting you." "That's the point," Richard said, sliding on his dark sunglasses. "Take me home." The mansion gates opened silently, the security guards saluting, unaware their boss had returned. Inside, the house glowed faintly, as if it were holding secrets of its own. Richard stepped out, his polished shoes echoing against the marble. Normally, he would hear the sound of the TV or his wife's footsteps, or the housekeeper moving around. But tonight there was music, soft, slow, almost romantic, and laughter. Richard stopped, his jaw tightened. It was not his laughter. He moved like a shadow through the hallway, each step heavier than the last. The closer he came, the clearer the sounds grew. Voices, whispers, giggles that made his blood boil. He paused outside the bedroom door, his hand hovering over the handle. His heart pounded like he was about to close a billion-dollar deal. But this was no boardroom. He pushed the door slightly, just enough to see light spill out. And what he saw inside, Richard's chest tightened, his grip on the handle trembled. The billionaire CEO, a man who never feared rivals or losses, felt his entire world begin to collapse in that single moment. Grab your snacks, sit down, and stick with us as we unfold this incredible story. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because what comes next will shock you. Richard's hand hovered on the door handle, ready to push it open. But then, voices rose from inside. Not just laughter anymore. Words, conversations he was never meant to hear. He froze. His ears sharpened. "Relax," a man's voice whispered, low but firm. "No one will ever know. Richard travels too much. He has no idea." Richard's breath caught in his throat. A man's voice, in his bedroom. Then came his wife's voice, soft, trembling, but laced with guilt. "I feel horrible sometimes, especially when I look at her. Richard loves that girl with his whole life. He doesn't know she isn't his." Richard's entire body went cold. The man chuckled darkly. "He doesn't need to know. She's mine, our little secret. As long as you play the perfect wife, he'll never suspect a thing." Richard staggered back from the door, his chest heaving like someone had stabbed him. The world around him blurred. Not his, the daughter he raised. The little girl who ran into his arms every morning. The child he promised the world. Not his. He gripped the wall, his palms slick with sweat. Every deal he ever closed, every empire he ever built, suddenly felt worthless. Inside, they laughed again, mocking, carefree. Richard's eyes burned with rage and heartbreak. He wanted to burst through the door, to confront them, to tear the truth out with his own hands. But his legs wouldn't move. Instead, he stumbled backward, retreating down the hallway. For the first time in years, the billionaire CEO felt powerless. And in that moment, Richard Dyke made a silent vow. "If everything I've built is a lie, then they will regret ever deceiving me." Viewers, what would you do if you were Richard? If the daughter you love with your life turned out not to be yours? Stay tuned, because the storm has only just begun. Richard walked out of the hallway like a ghost. His feet carried him, but his mind was frozen in one place. Those words. Richard loves that girl with his whole life. He doesn't know she isn't his. The sentence repeated in his head like a curse. By the time he reached his study, his hands were trembling. The man who could stare down presidents, who could silence boardrooms with a glance, now struggled to breathe. He poured himself a glass of whiskey. His fingers shook so badly that the liquid spilled onto the desk. He downed it in one gulp, but it didn't burn enough to erase the sting in his chest. He thought of his daughter, his princess, the girl who always waited at the door whenever he returned from a trip, screaming, "Daddy!" and jumping into his arms. Now every hug, every kiss, every bedtime story felt like a cruel joke. Richard slammed the glass against the desk. "No," he muttered, his voice cracking. "No one humiliates me like this. No one. Hours passed. He stayed locked in his study, staring at the darkness, replaying the whispers. When the mansion finally grew quiet, Richard stood. He wasn't going to confront her yet. Not tonight. No. He wanted her to feel safe, to think her lies were still working, to believe he was still the clueless husband who adored her. Because when the truth came out, it would not come in whispers. It would come like an earthquake. The next morning, Richard was already dressed when his wife Isabella came down to breakfast. She wore a silk robe, her hair still messy from the night before, but her smile was polished. "Darling," she said, kissing his cheek, "you didn't tell me you were coming home." Richard smiled faintly, hiding the storm behind his eyes. "Surprise." She laughed, pouring herself tea. "You work too hard. I was worried you'd collapse one day from exhaustion." Richard studied her quietly. Worried? The same lips that lied to him hours ago now spoke of worry. He wanted to slam his fist on the table and shout, "Whose child is she then? Who is the man in my house?" But instead, he lifted his fork calmly and said, "Perhaps you're right. Maybe I should spend more time at home." Her eyes flickered for a second. Just a second. Enough for him to see fear. "Yes, yes, you should," she replied quickly, forcing a smile. Richard leaned back, his smile cold. "Oh, I will. And when I do, Isabella, I promise you, nothing will ever be the same again. What Richard is planning will leave you speechless. He has decided not to confront his wife yet, but to give her the performance of a lifetime. Stay with us, because the storm is only beginning." The breakfast table was quiet except for the clink of cutlery against porcelain. Richard barely touched his food, but his mind was already 10 steps ahead. Isabella, sipping her tea with delicate grace, tried to mask her nerves. Richard had been different that morning. Calm, too calm. His smile didn't reach his eyes, yet he said nothing about where he'd been or why he'd returned unannounced. She thought maybe he hadn't discovered anything. Maybe she was still safe. That illusion was exactly what Richard wanted. He placed his napkin down slowly and looked at her. "Isabella," he began, his tone smooth, almost tender. "Yes, darling?" She looked up, her lips curving in a hopeful smile. Richard leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "I've been thinking. Your birthday is coming up, isn't it?" Her face brightened immediately. "Yes, next month. I want to give you something you'll never forget." Isabella chuckled softly, her hand brushing his. "Oh, Richard, you've already given me everything. The house, the cars, the jewelry. What more could I possibly want?" Richard's smile deepened, hiding the venom beneath. "Not what you want, Isabella. What you deserve." Her cheeks flushed. She took another sip of tea, giddy at the thought of what the richest man in Lagos might be planning for her. A diamond necklace, a new villa in Dubai, perhaps even a yacht. "You've done so much for me already," she said, her voice warm. "But if you insist, I suppose I'll have to accept." Richard chuckled. "Oh, it won't just be a gift. It'll be a celebration. The biggest birthday party anyone has ever seen. Politicians, business tycoons, celebrities. The whole city will be there, all to honor you, Isabella." Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Yes," Richard said, lifting his glass. "A night you will never forget." She grinned from ear to ear, never suspecting that her husband's words carried a double meaning. Over the next weeks, the mansion buzzed with preparations. Event planners filled the halls, decorators measured spaces, and chefs tested menus for the grand night. Isabella bathed in the attention. She tried on gowns, rehearsed smiles, and practiced her speech for the cameras. Her birthday was going to cement her status as the queen of Lagos society. But Richard moved in silence. Behind the scenes, he contacted investigators. He traced phone records. He hired a private detective who brought him photos, receipts, even DNA tests. Every piece of evidence he collected was like a dagger. Proof that Isabella had betrayed him. Proof that the daughter he adored was not his by blood. And he kept all of it locked in a single black folder. A folder he planned to open in front of the world. One evening, as Isabella twirled in front of the mirror in her brand new diamond-studded gown, she smiled at Richard. "You've outdone yourself, darling. I feel like a queen already." Richard kissed her hand gently, his lips cold against her skin. "You deserve it, Isabella. You truly do. But in his heart, Richard whispered, "On your birthday, the world will see who you really are." Imagine believing you're about to receive the grandest celebration of your life, only to discover it's a trap, planned by the very man you betrayed. Viewers, stay tuned, because Isabella's birthday it will be the night her world comes crashing down. The night of Isabella's birthday arrived like a royal coronation. The mansion glittered with lights that could be seen from miles away. Luxury cars lined the driveway, sleek black limousines, Rolls-Royces, and sports cars gleaming under the moonlight. Security men in sharp suits stood at every corner, earpieces glinting. Inside the grand ballroom was a vision of gold and crystal. Chandeliers sparkled like captured stars, casting their light on hundreds of guests. The scent of roses and expensive perfume filled the air as Lagos's elite mingled, laughing and raising glasses of champagne. Cameras flashed. Journalists jotted down notes. The event was already the talk of the city. And at the center of it all stood Isabella, draped in a floor-length emerald ornament, her diamonds glittering brighter than the chandeliers. She waved elegantly at guests, soaking in the praise. "Oh, Richard," she whispered to her husband as he led her to the stage. "This is everything I dreamed of. You've made me the happiest woman alive." Richard smiled faintly, his eyes unreadable. "And tonight, my love, you will indeed have everything you deserve." As the night went on, the party grew louder, grander. Laughter echoed, glasses clinked, and the band played upbeat jazz that filled the ballroom. Isabella basked in it all, posing for photos, whispering with friends, accepting compliments. She felt invincible, but Richard moved like a shadow, calm, calculated, watching her every move. Finally, as the clock struck 9, the master of ceremonies took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" The crowd hushed, cameras pointing toward the stage. "It is time for the moment we've all been waiting for, the celebration of the woman of the hour, our beloved Isabella, hosted by none other than her husband, the legendary billionaire, Mr. Richard Cole." Thunderous applause erupted. Richard walked to the stage, his presence commanding instant silence. He stood tall, his black tuxedo sharp, his face carved from stone. He took the microphone, glanced at Isabella, smiling brightly at his side, and then looked out over the sea of faces. "Tonight," Richard began, his voice deep and steady, "we gather to honor my wife, Isabella, a woman of beauty, grace, and loyalty." The word loyalty lingered like poison in the air. Isabella's smile wavered for a split second before she recovered. She laughed softly, linking her arm through his. Richard continued, "Over the years, I have built empires, negotiated with kings and presidents, but nothing I treasure more than my family, my wife, and my daughter." Gasps of admiration rippled through the crowd. Isabella's eyes shone as she held his hand tighter. But Richard's next words froze her blood. "And so tonight, in front of you all, I have a very special surprise for my wife. A gift she will never forget." The lights dimmed. A projector screen descended from the ceiling. Guests clapped and cheered, expecting a slideshow of romantic memories. Isabella's heart raced with excitement. She placed her hand on her chest, smiling, already imagining pictures of their vacations, anniversaries, and family moments. But then, the first image appeared. Not a wedding photo, not a family portrait. A grainy photograph of Isabella entering a hotel late at night, her hand clasped with another man's. The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed wildly. Richard's voice echoed through the speakers. "For years, I have loved and trusted this woman. I built her a palace. I gave her everything. And this is how she repays me." Another image appeared. Isabella and the same man kissing in the shadows of a parking lot. Gasps turned into whispers, whispers into roars. Isabella's face drained of color. She shook her head violently. "Richard! No! Stop this! This isn't what it looks like!" But Richard ignored her. His face was carved in stone. And for the grandest surprise of all, he lifted a black folder from the podium and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "The truth about the daughter I raised and cherished." The room fell silent, deadly silent. Richard looked at Isabella one last time, his eyes cold as ice. Ladies and gentlemen, my wife has deceived me for 15 years. The child I thought was mine is not. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some screamed, others gasped. Reporters scrambled for every word. Isabella collapsed to her knees, sobbing, clutching Richard's leg. Please, Richard, don't do this here. Please. But Richard pulled away, his voice like thunder. No, Isabella, the world will see you for who you really are. And with that, the screen behind them lit up with the day test. Isabella's perfect world had just shattered before her eyes. The ballroom was chaos. Cameras flashed, guests screamed. Isabella begged on her knees. But Richard didn't stay to hear it. He turned his back on the woman who had broken him and walked out of his mansion. Out of the glittering hall, out of the noise, out of everything he once called life. His footsteps echoed against the marble floor as he walked into the cool night, each step heavier than the last. By the time he reached the gates, his tuxedo felt like a shroud. He loosened his tie, climbed into, "Leave me." Richard's voice was hollow. "Go home. Don't follow me." The driver hesitated, but Richard's eyes left no room for argument. The billionaire stepped out and walked alone into the darkness. Hours later, he was slumped over the counter of a dimly lit bar. Bottles of whiskey surrounded him, his tie abandoned, his shirt half open. The once proud, untouchable Richard Cole was gone. Only a broken man remained, drowning his sorrows glass after glass. By midnight, he stumbled out into the street, his vision blurred, his body heavy. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't care. He only wanted the pain to stop. He collapsed on the cold pavement. People passed him by. Some recognized him but kept their distance, too shocked to approach. A billionaire lying in the gutter like a beggar? Unthinkable. But one person didn't walk away. The next morning, Richard awoke to the faint smell of soap and freshly brewed tea. His eyes fluttered open, and he frowned at the unfamiliar ceiling above him. Where was he? He sat up slowly, his head pounding, and looked around. The room was small but neat. Cream walls, a wooden shelf with books, a vase of fresh flowers by the window. Then, the door creaked open, and she walked in. A young woman, no diamonds, no designer gown. Just a simple dress, her hair tied back, her face fresh and unpainted. She carried a tray with a steaming cup and a soft smile. "You're awake," she said gently, setting the tray beside him. "You gave me quite a scare last night." Richard blinked, confused. "Last night? You collapsed on the road. I couldn't just leave you there, so I brought you home." Her voice was steady, without fear, without judgment. Richard stared at her, stunned. You don't know who I am?" The woman tilted her head, her eyes calm and honest. "I know enough. You're a man in pain. That's all I need to know." For the first time in years, Richard felt something break inside him, not anger, not betrayal. Relief. He exhaled shakily, covering his face with his hand. The tears he had buried for so long threatened to spill, and the woman simply sat with him. No questions, no demands, just presence. Richard didn't know it yet, but the night he collapsed in despair was the night he stumbled into a love more real than anything he had ever known. Richard stayed in the small guest room of the mysterious woman's home longer than he intended. What was meant to be a single night stretched into days. He told himself it was just because he wasn't ready to face the press, that if the media saw him in this broken state, his empire would crumble. He told himself he needed to gather his strength before returning to his mansion. But the truth was simpler. He didn't want to leave her. Her name was Elena. She lived quietly, working as a freelance artist, painting portraits for families in her neighborhood. Her home was small, her income modest, but her spirit stronger than anyone Richard had ever met. Every morning she brewed him tea. Every evening she left a plate of food by his door, even when he didn't eat. She never asked about his billions. She never mentioned Isabella. She never pressed him about why a man like him had stumbled into her life. And that unsettled Richard. He wasn't used to kindness without strings attached. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in orange streaks, Elena found him sitting on the porch, staring at nothing. "You should eat something," she said, holding out a bowl of soup. I'm not hungry, Richard muttered. You've said that 3 times today. She set the bowl beside him and sat down. You're starving yourself. Richard looked at her, his jaw tightening. Why do you care? Elena turned to him, her eyes steady. Because you're human, because you are hurting, and because no one deserves to suffer alone. Something inside him cracked. He wanted to yell, to tell her she didn't understand, to push her away. But instead he whispered, You don't know what I've lost. Her voice was calm. Then tell me. Richard's throat tightened. The words burned at the edge of his lips, but he swallowed them back. He wasn't ready. He couldn't share his shame yet. So instead he stood abruptly and stormed inside, leaving Elena staring after him in silence. That night Richard lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Elena's words echoed in his mind. No one deserves to suffer alone. But hadn't he been alone all along? Even with Isabella by his side, hadn't he always been misunderstood? He closed his eyes, but sleep never came. And somewhere deep inside, a dangerous thought stirred. Could this woman see the real me? 2 weeks passed. Richard still hadn't returned to his mansion. His assistant flooded his phone with missed calls. His driver came by Elena's street twice, searching. But Richard ignored it all. Instead, he found himself in Elena's small art studio, surrounded by half-finished canvases and brushes. He sat silently in a corner while she painted, watching the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way her hands moved with grace. He hated himself for it, but he couldn't stop staring at her. One afternoon, as Elena cleaned her brushes, she looked at him with quiet determination. You can't stay here forever, Richard. He flinched at the sound of his name on her lips. She rarely called him that. Most times she simply said you. Where else would I go? He muttered. To your life, she replied. To the people waiting for you. Richard scoffed. You think I have people waiting? The woman I loved betrayed me. The child I thought was mine isn't. Everything I've built feels like a lie. Tell me, Elena, what life am I supposed to return to? Elena set her brush down firmly, her eyes locking onto his. The one you choose to rebuild. Richard froze. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not his board members, not his so-called friends, not even Isabella. Elena leaned forward, her voice soft but piercing. You think your money defines you, but it doesn't. You are hiding behind it. You're drowning in it. And until you face your pain, until you stop running from it, you'll never heal. Richard's chest tightened. Anger rose in his throat, but so did something else. Fear. You don't understand, he growled. You don't know what it feels like to be deceived, to realize the life you thought you had was nothing but ashes. I don't, Elena admitted, but I do know what it's like to lose. I've lost people I loved, and I know that running from the pain doesn't erase it. It only poisons you. Her words hit him like thunder. He wanted to scream, to argue, but deep inside he knew she was right. For the first time, Richard lowered his guard. His voice broke as he whispered, I don't know how to live without hate anymore. Elena reached across the table and touched his hand, not as a lover, not yet, but as someone offering hope. Then let me teach you. Richard had lived in penthouses with ceilings higher than Elena's entire house. He had dined on gold-plated plates, drunk wines worth more than her yearly rent, and driven cars that made people stop and stare. Yet for the first time in his life, he found peace in simplicity. It was in the way Elena hummed while she cooked, in the way her laughter filled the air when she teased the children who came by for free sketches, in the way she sat cross-legged on the floor, her hair in a messy bun, painting with colors that somehow told more truth than his entire fortune. Richard was mesmerized. One evening, Elena caught him staring as she wiped paint from her cheek. What? She asked, raising a brow. Richard cleared his throat, trying to sound casual. Nothing, I didn't think people like you still existed. People like me? Elena tilted her head. You don't want anything from me. His voice was low, almost suspicious. You know who I am, yet you don't ask for favors, money, or even a promise. Everyone wants something from Richard Bentley. But you're different. Elena gave a small smile, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Maybe because I don't care about Richard Bentley, the billionaire. I only care about Richard, the man sitting here, who's hurting more than he admits. The words hit him like a punch. For so long, he had hidden behind his title, his money, his power. Now someone was looking past it, and it terrified him. That night, Elena invited him to dinner with her neighbors. It wasn't grand, just a gathering of a few families around a wooden table in her backyard. The food was simple: roasted corn, yam, vegetable stew. The children ran around barefoot, laughing. Richard sat stiff at first, unused to the chatter, the easy warmth, but soon he found himself laughing too. When one of the little boys asked him if he could juggle, Richard surprised even himself by picking up 3 oranges and trying, only to fail miserably and earn peals of laughter from the kids. Elena watched from the side, her heart softening. For the first time, she saw Richard without his armor. Later, when the guests left and the firewood embers glowed faintly, Richard lingered outside with her. "You're smiling," Elena said. Richard gave a half shrug. "It's been a long time. You should do it more often. You look human when you smile." He chuckled, shaking his head, but then his expression grew serious. "Elena, do you believe people can change?" She looked at him thoughtfully. "I believe people can heal, and healing changes you." Silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Richard's heart raced. He wanted to tell her everything, about Isabella, the betrayal, the daughter who wasn't his. But the words stuck. He wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, he whispered, almost to himself, "You make me want to be better." Elena's eyes softened, but she didn't press further. She simply touched his hand lightly, a gentle reminder that she was there. That night, Richard lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his chest strangely light. For the first time in weeks, he slept without nightmares. And he knew it wasn't the mansion, the money, or the empire that gave him peace. It was her. And so the billionaire who once thought money could buy happiness discovered that true wealth was not in mansions or cars, but in the heart that beats beside you. Richard had lost everything he thought mattered, only to find what truly mattered in the most unexpected place: love, honesty, and peace. Viewers, remember, life has a way of humbling the proud and healing the broken. Grab your snacks, sit with us again next time, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories.